Welcome back YouTubers to my channel of an everyday life of an Aspie. If you're new, I welcome you all. I'm Aspie. I'm all about creating mental health and sharing my life stories, as well as fun and games along the way. So if you're into any of these, feel free to join me on the bandwagon by subscribing on the bottom right hand corner of the screen. And if you do so, don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you can keep up to date with these future updates and more. It'll be much appreciated. So today's topic, obviously, I'm going to be talking about is autistic related. And this one's going to be based on the sensory differences between the sensory seeking versus seeking avoiding and seeking defensiveness. Along with this, it'll be a term of definitions as well as also what I am as a person, so to speak, if I'm a sensory seeking or sensory avoiding on the 5 classic senses that we use in our everyday life. Well, even though it's debatable now that there is more than just the 5 classic senses that we use, of the classic ones of the smell, touch, taste, hearing and whatnot. But before I begin this, you may be wondering what sensory integration is. A form of occupational therapy in which special exercises are used to strengthen the patient's sense of touch, balance, and where the body and its parts are in space, which is known as respiration. Also, in saying this though, basically another one is for to make a clearer understanding of what sensory integration is, if you want to know, is the ability to take in info through our sensory senses of our smell, touch, taste, what have you, and put it together with prior info and maybe creating memories and knowledge that is stored in the brain, and then we'll make a meaningful response towards that particular item. It's the process that's dependent upon the efficient interrogation of all sensory experiences, mixed with the environmental situations and demands and the child's own personality and reactions. So you may be wondering, what is sensory seeking, right? Well, sensory seeking is another term that is used for autistics that has a sensory processing disorder, or just any child with a sensory processing disorder. That a child may be sensory craving, sensory seeking, or showing sensory defensiveness or offensiveness. In this case, for sensory seeking, the child will always use their 5 classic senses that they like to touch, taste, smell, balance. In the diagram above me or beside me right now, as you can see, will be a diagram showing about a child with a sensory processing disorder, just to give you guys a heads up to what I'm sharing with you all today of the sensory seeking versus the sensory avoidance, as well as the sensory defensiveness or offensiveness in this case. So hopefully that will give you a clearer understanding. Just a reminder as a keynote also before I end this, that not all autistics are the same, however, in their way of dealing with the sensory inputs and outputs. So it's just a matter of knowing what's what for every child will be different. This is defined ultimately as the child is highly interested in movements, lights, colours, smells, taste that will excite them. A person's nervous system will require an unusual amount of stimulation, however. And obviously the examples for that is they could be wanting to use something with their hands, like playing with clay or some sort of fidget toy, or they would like to splash around in the mud, you know, getting all dirty. Some may want to chew certain objects or clothing. Some of them may want to rub against walls and people, spinning around in circles, dancing around, maybe just burning off energy when they're full of sensory, you know, input. However, and obviously sensory avoidance is quite the opposite. Sensory avoidance is basically just avoiding of all these 5 senses that are involved, that creates that overwhelming experience for them, that creates that sensory overload versus the overwhelming sensation of maybe a meltdown if they are based on what they have been through. Sensory processing obviously is a term that is used here, which is a natural process that is of the brain function that we all experience when we are younger, obviously, and sometimes this is continually right before we are actually born. And then you may be answering, what is sensory defensiveness? However, on the other scale of things, when I have mentioned this, This is characterized by avoidance type behaviors to sensory activities or situations as the brain registers sensations too intensely. Emotionally charged behaviors characterized by the flight or fright response from a person, however, will frequently seen as the child will misinterpret or misunderstand the normal sensory input as life-threatening situations that will tend to make them just fly away, even if it wasn't a dangerous situation here. I'm going to just quickly give you a few bits and pieces of advice before I define myself as these 5 things. If I'm a sensory seeking, avoiding, or seeking defendants of the sight, touch and smell. But let's begin. You will need to answer a few questions to yourself here, and the first one is, what is you should do to help satiate or sensory this seeking child? Firstly, determine what child wants to experience, and then learn from the effects of the items or behaviors that are shown that the child will use to fulfill that sensory need. You can then work on the sensory integration, however, by redirecting the more appropriate response of the sensory experiences of what your child seeks to provide over time to help integrate and reduce any unwanted behavior. You need to obviously discover your child's kind of craves, right? To begin with, you need to know what your child is experiencing. Brainstorm with other people around you that knows your child and actually determine how you can engage with the child in some sensory integration that I've clearly mentioned as clear examples to fit in the desired experiences in your child's routines and balances. Learn how the child's mind will change if you engage them in high sensory activities often, i.e. playing with blocks is obviously not harmful, but other ends of it, if you get your child engaged in a high activity for a long period of time, like intense computer games that involves violence and whatnot, or like your first person shooting, that can lead often to isolation, loneliness, addiction, and maybe sometimes if tend to their moods will change, and as well as saying that the chemical imbalance of the brain, they will become depressed. So my advice here is limit some screen time with your child that uses that kind of activity, and use sensory resources like your fidget toys or something that engage with them to burn off surplus steam. See if you can work towards an appropriate sensory integration, especially activities that involves being with another person, i.e. maybe taking them to basically dance lessons or a rugby game or whatever you think your child will work your way up. Too much of anything is a bad thing, period. Make sure your child knows these limits to engaging in high sensory activities. Example wise, if they're like bumping into walls or people or giving unsolicited hugs to people, provide other alternatives, options like a weighted blanket. Watch your child's behavior before, during and after their sensory seeking experiences. Learn what works for them, what is enjoyed in moderation, and what should be eliminated if it becomes too much. Watch for changes in the child as they grow. Children's taste, or just anything in general, will change over time. As they age, anyone studying with their child should encourage the pursuit of any new interest that they may like. Be cautious and unafraid, and also work with your child to allow experimentation and growth. Another one that you need to maybe bear in mind also is you're going to ask me is, so what am I? Am I a sensory seeking, sensory avoiding, or sensory defensive? Well, for the first one, touch, I'm okay with being hugged and all that, and even though it may not, to a point this is, because I don't mind hugging certain people if people know their personal boundaries and know a way of it. You need to have certain boundaries set up for that. For other parts of that sensory seeking, I like to keep myself busy, working with my hands. I like certain smells, not all, but some can be a bit more overwhelming. I'm into softer music than louder music, so I tend to avoid real loud music that is really heavy metal based or heavy rock based, say. I'm the kind of girl that likes to basically just, with some sounds can be doable, some not, as said. So with the lighting and stuff for my senses of the seeing, I'm a bit of in between, even though I'm into the stuff, the lighting period of certain self-calming reflective lights instead of the real big booming lights of certain kinds that is really bright and gives me down headaches. Another one is I'm all about full of energy, full of beans, and I basically, you know, like to burn off energy, so I need something to keep me busy. Obviously, many people should know me by now, obviously, because I'm always a busybody. So this quickly ends, obviously, sensory seeking versus seeking, sensory avoiding, and defensiveness. What's the difference and definitions of it? Hopefully you like this. Smash the like if you did, comment below. Feel free to follow me on the social medias listed below. Feel free to also subscribe if you haven't done so and want to join me on the bandwagon for this and more type topics. Feel free to turn on the notification bell as said, so that you can keep up to date with what's going on. And also, in saying this, I want to challenge you guys who are either autistic or you know someone that is autistic or not that has these kind of sensory processing disorders. What do you do to help them in the way of, you know, meeting their needs? And also, in saying this, what type of person are you? Are you sensory seeking or sensory avoidance? And what do you do to help you on this? And also also, before I end this, don't forget, as I said, I have been doing projects at the moment, researching up what will be best suited to do for what I want to do before next year. And in saying this, I would like to take the time to also introduce, you know, Kofi, that Patreon page, and then there's another Patreon page that I'm trying to tidy up, but I'm not sure how I'm going to go about it yet. But in all for today, guys, thanks for support, thanks for watching, do what you love it.